Welcome to English Mirrors, yet another video on literary theory. Today we discuss New Historicism, one of the major theories after the post-war period. The term New Historicism was coined by the American critic Stephen Greenblatt, whose book Renaissance Self-Fashioning from Moore to Shakespeare, published in 1980, is usually regarded as its beginning. Similar tendencies can be identified in work by various critics published during the 1970s. A good example being J. W. Lever's The Tragedy of State, a study of Jacobean drama, published in 1971. This brief and epoch-making book challenged conservative critical views about Jacobean theatre and linked the plays much more closely with the political events of their era than previous critics had done. It is a method based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts, usually of the same historical period. New Historicism refuses, at least ostensibly, to privilege the literary text. Instead of a literary foreground and a historical background, it envisages and practices a mode of study in which literary and non-literary texts are given equal weight and constantly inform or interrogate each other. American critic Louis Montrose, he defines it as a combined interest in the textuality of history, the historicity of texts. It involves, in Greenblatt's words, an intensified willingness to read all of the textual traces of the past with attention traditionally conferred only on literary texts. Typically, a new historical essay will place the literary text within the frame of a non-literary text. Thus, Greenblatt's main innovation from the viewpoint of literary study was to juxtapose the plays of the Renaissance period with the horrifying colonialist policies pursued by all the major European powers of the era. Dramatic openings often cite date and place and have all the force of the documentary, eyewitness account, strongly evoking the quality of lived experience rather than history. Since these historical documents are not subordinated as contexts, but are analyzed in their own right, we should perhaps call them co-texts rather than contexts. The text and context used will be seen as expressions of the same historical moment and interpreted accordingly. Earlier approaches made a hierarchical separation between the literary text, which was the object of value, the jewel, as it were, and the historical background, which was merely the setting and by definition of lesser worth. The practice of giving equal weighting to literary and non-literary material is the first and major difference between the new and the old historicism. A second important difference between old and new historicism is encapsulated in the word archival, in the phrase the archival continuum quoted earlier. For that word indicates that new historicism is indeed a historicist rather than a historical movement. It is interested in history as represented and recorded in written documents, in history as text. Historical events as such, it would argue, are irrecoverably lost. New historicism accepts Derrida's view that there is nothing outside the text, in the special sense that everything about the past is only available to us in textualized form. It is thrice processed, first through the ideology or outlook or discursive practices of its own time, then through those of ours, and finally through the distorting web of language itself. New historicist essays always themselves constitute another remaking, another permutation of the past, as the play or poem under discussion is juxtaposed with a chosen document so that a new entity is formed. New historicism is resolutely anti-establishment, always implicitly on the side of liberal ideals of personal freedom and accepting and celebrating all forms of difference and deviance. Advantages and disadvantages of new historicism. Although it is founded upon post-structuralist thinking, it is written in a far more accessible way, for the most part avoiding post-structuralism's characteristically dense style and vocabulary. Secondly, the material itself is often fascinating and is wholly distinctive in the context of literary studies. Thirdly, the political edge of new historicist writing is always sharp, but at the same time it avoids the problems frequently encountered in straight Marxist criticism. It seems less overtly polemical and more willing to allow the historical evidence its own voice. Now, summing up the major points, they juxtapose literary and non-literary texts, reading the former in the light of the later. Second one, they try thereby to defamiliarize the canonical literary text, detaching it from the accumulated weight of previous literary scholarship and seeing it as if new. They focus attention within both text and context on issues of state power and how it is maintained, on patriarchal structures and their perpetuation, and on the process of colonization with its accompanying mindset. Finally, they make use in doing so of aspects of the post-structuralist outlook, especially Derrida's notion that every facet of reality is textualized, and Foucault's idea of social structures are determined by dominant discursive practices. Thank you for watching this video.